Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we're going to try to tackle some questions about mesh modeling, or rather modeling off of a scan reference mesh. So I get a lot of questions on this channel, and we've done plenty of videos in Plasticity, in QuickSurface, and Fusion. And today what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover those three pieces of software: Plasticity, Fusion, and QuickSurface. And we're going to talk about some of the different tools that we have available to recreate geometry from a mesh. So we're going to get started in Plasticity, and we'll talk about the two different ways that we really have to create models or designs off of a scan reference mesh. And then we'll hop into Fusion, talk about the tools we have there, and then we'll hop into QuickSurface. So this is basically going to be in order of difficulty. Now, Plasticity is a great program, and it does extremely well with high quality surfaces. I think that the tool sets for reverse engineering a mesh are good in some cases for things like prismatic parts, but when we get into complex shapes, it becomes a little bit more cumbersome depending on what you're doing. So let's get started in Plasticity first, talking about this scanned fairing here. So the two main tools that we have when we're dealing with Plasticity is constrained surface, and then the ability to just simply draw curves on a mesh. So to get started, first I'm going to hit F and start to find constrained surface. And basically what we do here is we start building out a box or a grid. And you can add multiple points if you need to continue to build the shape out and kind of work until you're happy with it, and then you can right click and say okay. Now this surface is not going to be a perfect match, so you can see here that it's a little bit low and a little bit high. The more points that we put, the better it will start to align to it, but in general this is a great way to do something like a prismatic face. And the second thing that we would do here is we would go to edge mode, and then we would just basically extend these edges out until it goes past the original surface. And that way you can continue to do this and build multiple surfaces and then trim them back. So again, not an ideal workflow for all models, but this can work pretty well for more prismatic shapes. The second approach that we have to recreate geometry is simply to just start drawing on the face. Now you have to be careful here because sometimes you'll notice when you get started, the auto snaps are going to try to go in a direction away from the mesh. So you can see here it says Z comma face. If I click there, what actually happens is that point is nowhere on the mesh. So you have to be careful whenever you see Z, X, Y, or perpendicular or something like that next to the cursor. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing a curve here, making sure that I don't snap to Z or X or Y. I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to use Shift R, which is basically just repeat the last command. Right click to accept that, Shift R again. And again, you want to make sure it's not going in a specific direction like Y. Right click, Shift R, and then I'm just going to begin. Let's go ahead and bring this over, come up to maybe there, and then we'll do it one more time. Now, from here, what we could do is some internal curves as well. So if we want to help this out, we can maybe add a couple of extra curves. Go ahead and let's add another one here. Again, make sure it's not, you don't want to snap to the CVs because they're not on the curve. You want to snap to the curve, or in some cases, you can see there it said vertex. What we need to do is hold down Control and snap to the curve while we're moving it. And now what we have is a boundary here. We can select this. Now, if you're a studio user and you have XNURBS, this will work. If you don't, then you probably need to use something like Patch. But XNURBS will allow us to use these internal guides to help define the shape. And if I hide the mesh, you can see basically we're building that shape out, and we can use these internal guide curves to help define it. This looks like this edge probably wasn't actually on the mesh. So if I redo this, if I deselect that edge and go to XNURBS, XNURBS is actually able to create geometry without a full close profile. So you can see that curve was definitely off, but we can add in these internal guides, and then we can create a surface that way. So again, something to keep in mind, XNURBS is quite a bit more flexible than, say, using the patch tool. But you still have to be careful with these curves and making sure that they are snapping to the surfaces. So those are the two main ways that we have to create surfaces and geometry based on a mesh. So with a part like this, it would take quite a long time to do. It would be a little cumbersome, but I would typically start by identifying independent faces, or how should we say this? Probably geometry that, in this case, geometry where you can identify a change in curvature. And so what I mean by that is, for example, we can see here that this face, let's go ahead and just maybe wrap back up here. That face right there is up against this edge. So we obviously have a change in curvature there. It kind of folds out and comes to more of a flat right here, carries down under here. So I would start by creating the surface here and then working my way out. So I would do that by creating a boundary and then start to add some internal guide curves. And then I could do something like a patch or X-NURBS to fill that in, use the internal guide curve, and you can see how it's starting to get a better shape, aligning more to the mesh. So you would need to build out a structure or a network of these curves in order to start to generate these surfaces, but that is the method that we would use to approach a part like this. All right, so now that we've seen kind of different ways that we can do this in Plasticity, let's hop over to Fusion. Now we actually have a couple of different methods here in Fusion. If we try to take the same approach of, say, creating a sketch, if we turn on 3D Sketch, and I just grab a spline, if I just start drawing a spline, by default, Fusion is going to put that on a plane. It's not really going to snap to the mesh in the same way that it does in Plasticity. So that's not the method that I would choose or pick in order to build out a network or a surface in Fusion. So the two ways that we could do this in Fusion, one is to generate what's called mesh section sketches. This works well if you're trying to build out a cross section for something like a loft. So for example, we create a mesh section sketch. We need to pick the mesh body, and then we need to pick a plane. I'm going to go ahead and pick this as my default plane. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to repeat that, pick the mesh body, and I'm only going to do this, I'm only going to create a couple of curves here. And I'll do it one more time. And we'll pick this plane and I'll just pull it back this way. It's going to be a little bit messy because of the Kawasaki logo in there. But essentially what happens is when you have mesh section sketches, you need to go back into the sketch. And then what we can do, and I'll rotate this so we can see it a bit better. And then what we can do is we can fit curves to mesh section. So I would take a spline, and basically the way that you do this is you have to pick points. So if you pick a start and an end point, basically what it's going to do is it's going to start generating these curves. And we'll go ahead and we'll just come down to here. The problem with this method is that these curves, in my opinion, are pretty bad. And what I mean by that is if I select this one and I show the curvature combs, let's make them pretty big. That should be a relatively low curvature spline there. And you can see it's got a bunch of jagged edges in it. It actually goes from concave to convex down here. So this is where you kind of run into trouble. And a program like QuickSurface tends to do a little bit better job at creating these curves. Well, not a little bit, but it does a much better job at creating these curves. Let's go ahead and hide the body of the mesh so that we can see this a little bit better. So if we're going to go and do fit curve, we can increase the tolerance to something like, let's say within 0.5 millimeter. That's pretty big. But if I go all the way down to the bottom, it's going to generate one curve, and it's going to use that tolerance plus or minus 0.5 millimeter, and we're going to get a better curve. Let's increase the density. It's still not going to be great, but it can get better. So we'll say finish sketch, and we'll do this on the third one as well. I should have turned those curvature combs off because that's pretty messy. So for this one, I'll do fit curve, and I will do plus or minus 1 millimeter. That's pretty far off. But if we say create a curve in this area, you can see that now that it has the basically the tolerance plus or minus a millimeter, it's going to be quite a bit further away. I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom for this and say OK. So that's one way that we can go about this. And then we could use things like our surface tools, and we could loft from, let's go ahead and do chain selection. We can loft from this curve to this curve to this curve and generate a surface. But like I said, it is going to be pretty messy just based on those splines. So you would have to create a lot of cross sections, and you'd have to make sure that each of those splines has really good curvature on them. So personally, I only use that method if I'm dealing with prismatic parts and I need to extract things like lines or basic arcs. Anything that has complex curvature like this, I would go into my freeform tools. Now, a couple of ways that we can do this. The first way generally is to start with the face tool and making sure that you have object snap on. So with object snap on, let's go ahead and let's just do this piece down here. So basically what we do is we're going to start creating the polygons that we're going to use. So I'm going to come up here, down to that last point, and then we'll come over here. And this is our starting point. So if we hide the mesh, we now have a surface here that is a good starting point. What we need to do generally is subdivide it, and you can use a simple or exact. In this case, simple is going to work fine because what we're actually going to end up doing is using our pull tool to pull that up to the mesh. So the more that we do this, we can get a pretty nice layout, and we can get it really close to the mesh. Now the problem here is we don't know how close to the mesh, but we can get it relatively close. And then what we would do from here is we would continue with the modify tool, edit form. I'm going to use Alt and extrude this out, and maybe Alt and extrude it out again. And then we can say OK, go to modify and pull, and then we would just pull these points down to the mesh. Now what you're going to find is you're going to need to insert edges in certain areas. So for example, right here, we would need to come back, and dialogue's always getting in my way. Let's put that there. And then we would run the pull tool again. Basically, this is what we're going to be doing, going back and forth, adding edges, trying to get it to match the curvature. And then hopefully at the end of the day, we get a part that is a really high quality surface, and it's close to the underlying body. So this process is possible. It's just time consuming. So you would need to come in here, and we would need to continue to create more edges. You can also use the face tool if you want and continue to add more faces. Let's go ahead and actually pull this down. And then if we use the face tool with snap, we can snap to existing edges, and we can start to build. You'll notice there's like an edge here, so I would need to follow that. And I would try to come down here and back up. And I'm not going to do this entire part, but we'll do a little bit of it. And we'll come back to there. And then basically just trying to follow the curvature. And then we can come from here. Where this starts to become tough is going back and finding those existing endpoints. It can be helpful to change the opacity of the mesh. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as is for what we're doing. And it should be that one there. All right, and then if I hide the mesh, you can see that we're starting to build that shape out. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but once again, we could go through and do things like subdivide, and then we can make sure that we pull all these points out to the mesh. What you can see here is that there's not enough geometry, so I would probably go to manually insert an edge, run the pull command again. One thing with pull that you have to be careful with is make sure that it's on surface points, not control points. Those are what you'd see in box display. And then also auto is going to go to the closest place on the mesh. Sometimes you might want to manually select where it's going. But once again, if we hide the edges, we're starting to build high quality surfaces. We just have to do it manually. So it just takes a little bit of time. But those are the two main methods that we have, is the mesh section sketches in Fusion, and then using our freeform tools like creating a face snap to the mesh, and also using tools like pull that allow us to pull them down in addition to insert edge and subdivide and all the other modification tools. All right, so now let's talk about QuickSurface. Currently, I have the tools for QuickSurface Pro enabled. So there are some differences and nuances between Pro and Lite, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But if you are looking to use QuickSurface, QuickSurface Lite is roughly $400 a year. Pro is a perpetual license, and I believe currently it's $4,000. So if you are looking to buy and you want to get a discount, you can use the code LEAD10. That will get you 10% off. It also help out the channel. So let's just talk about the workflow here. I'm not going to do the entire thing, but I do want to talk about a couple of key steps. So the first thing that I would do is I would get rid of the logos. And the main reason for doing this is simply because when we have logos like that and we try to use tools like, let's say, Auto Freeform, it's going to try and create those in a sub-D body, and basically it just gets kind of messy. So what we want to do is clean up anything like that that we don't want. Then potentially on the holes, what we can do is we can expand the holes and we can fill them in. I'm going to do the same thing over here, expand the hole and fill it in. Now, if you happen to be working in QuickSurface Lite, another important step is to come in and clean up the boundary. Now, you can use things like anchor points if you want, but right now, basically just cleaning up that outside boundary, because when we have a scan that has jagged triangles on the outside, that can have a big impact on the quality of something like an auto freeform surface or even a fit surface that we use. Now, QuickSurface Lite does have the ability to do an auto freeform surface, but the algorithm that it uses is actually different than you get in Pro. You can get some basic shapes that are pretty good with the basic algorithm in Lite, but I will say from experience that Pro does a much better job. Now, we did a webinar for QuickSurface last month, and that video is on the channel, of course, so you can watch that through, and you'll be able to see the differences between the output from Lite and Pro. All right, so once the boundary is cleaned up, you can continue to do a lot of work in here. One thing that might be helpful is to separate certain areas of the design. And what I mean by that is if there is a certain area that you want to work on, and let's go ahead and I'll just add to this, go ahead and grab some more of these edges. But let's say you just wanted to recreate this portion of the design. Then what we could do is we could select it and we could copy it. So that way we have a copy of just that section and we could do an auto freeform on it. What we're doing here, I'm just going to wrap the entire thing just to show you, but that is an option that you can sort of break it up into individual pieces. So in QuickSurface, we do have the ability to do 2D sketches and pull curves out. I'm going to go ahead and select Create. And essentially in Pro, we've got a sketch assistant that can do a lot of this work for us. And we also have the ability to extract primitives. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and fit a curve. And all we need to do is just drag over our reference points for what we want to include. So any outliers we can leave behind. And then we're going to say back and OK. So we were able to create a curve that can be used for things like lofts and sweeps. So if we were to create another plane, let's say up here, then we would simply do the same thing. Extract primitives. We would select the areas that we're interested in, leaving any outliers. So down here, I can hit Alt and not use that endpoint there. We'll say OK. And then you could go to your CAD tools, your surfacing tools, for example, and you can loft between these to create a surface. Now, one of the big benefits that we have when we're working inside of QuickSurface is when we use tools like Auto Freeform or Fit Surface, we have the ability to do an analysis on how close it is to the mesh. So with the version Lite, you have a basic algorithm, and again, it's not as good. I'll do a preview of it so you can see. So what we get on the screen here is we get essentially a surface, and we can go back in and modify the freeform body and kind of see it wrapped over a lot of these details, and it did a pretty good job at getting most of the details here. But if we go and we take a look at using the feature aligned algorithm, I'm going to go ahead, allow it to improve the hole boundaries, do a preview. What we get on screen, the preview is actually going to be the sub-D or the freeform model instead of the patch surface. So this gives us a better idea of what we have to work with. And then we can take a look at the surface detail. You can see areas where we're maybe below or above. And then you can make design decisions whether or not you want to increase the number of triangles or the number of polygons, or work on just a specific area, for example, and you can continue to refine it from here. We also have the ability to change how we want to approach things like feature details. If we want to have a higher feature detail, or if we have symmetry in our part, we can include that as well. So this is a really powerful tool. And with just a few clicks, we're able to generate the vast majority of the big surfaces, and most of it looks pretty good. I mean, obviously there are some areas on a mesh like this where we would likely want to break it up into multiple pieces, but for the most part, it does look pretty good. Now, if you're using tools like the fit surface tools, so what you can do in here is you can have it generate segments. So this is going to look at basically the angle between polygons on the mesh. And then you can select an area, and then you can fit a surface based on that selection. So I'm going to select create and stay. I'm going to hide the surface, click up here and create a fit surface, create and stay. And then I'll hide that one. We'll do the one down here, and then we'll create it. So with these three, what we could do now is we could begin to trim them. So we can select all three of them. We can go into our trim tools. And again, with the Pro version, you have the ability to do things like automatic trimming. With the Lite version, you can still do trimming. It's just going to be manual. So basically, you would just pick the areas that you want to get rid of. And there are some little overlaps down here that we would want to get rid of. And maybe that. And we'll say OK. And then once we have these three, we could go in and use tools like fillet, and we could round those corners off. So I'm going to grab this edge here, and maybe this edge and this edge, see if we can do all three of them at the same time. And we'll drag that out, and we'll say OK. Let's hide the mesh. And you can see that we were able to use those tools to generate portions of the surfaces. Now, in reality, what you would need to do is still go through and figure out the areas of interest and break them down into multiple pieces. So if we were going to go in and do a fit surface, you can see on the larger mesh all the areas that it thinks it should divide it up. And you can play around with the tolerances. So if you want lower tolerances, you can drag it to the right, or higher tolerances, you can drag it to the left. And essentially what you're trying to do is identify the areas where you would create an individual surface. So like this face here, this face over here, the bottom, and so on. Extend them out, trim them, and then blend them together. So that's one possible workflow that you have. So with QuickSurface, we have the ability to do our 2D sketch sections like we do in Fusion. We have better tools that allow us to create nicer curves or generate nicer curves based on those. We also do have a multiple sections option that can go through and do this all at once, or at least do some of this all at once. Now, these are nice options, especially if you are trying to recreate something with lofts. You can simplify that process by generating a bunch of those sections at once based on the mesh. We have the ability to do auto freeform on the entire model with the basic tools in Lite, and also with some more advanced tools in Pro. Now, obviously, doing a little bit more cleanup on the mesh is going to help this out, but we do have the ability to get out an entire surface fairly quickly. And then we can also use manual tools in the case of fit surface, or just using surfacing tools in general, to rebuild sections of the design with those fit surfaces and trim them to each other. So these are all great options. And the tools that you pick, or the tools that you decide to use, really depend on the access that you have. So if you have Fusion, or if you have Plasticity and that's what you have to work with, Then you need to pick which direction you go, whether it's a constrained surface or curves on a surface and something like XNurbs if you have Plasticity Studio. Or if you're working in Fusion, I generally will go to freeform modeling like this. Or if you have QuickSurface, you have a whole host of tools. You've got auto surfacing and auto freeform and our section sketches and so on. There is one last thing I didn't mention that you can do in both the light version and pro version of QuickSurface, and this is essentially how we created our surface in Fusion. So what we can do is we can just essentially manually create the freeform bodies by dragging them out. And this does a pretty good job because it also has the analysis tools. So those analysis tools will help us get a good idea on the shapes, and you can manually drag them around and create the divisions where you want them. Anytime you see a red dot like that, you can also click on the icon there and it'll give you basically an extra division. So that works out pretty nicely. So we do still have these manual tools inside of QuickSurface Lite and Pro. You can decide which one you want to use, but it's a great way to manually build out these complex surfaces as well. So with all that information, hopefully that helps identify what each of these pieces of software does, where the tools can really come in handy if you're trying to recreate a complex shape quickly with things like auto freeform tools, or if you're trying to do it manually, understanding the workflow that you have available and also what the options kind of mean, freeform versus sketching versus surfacing. Now, if you have any questions on any of these, we've done videos in all three of them on Mesh before. But if you want to see more of this type of content in one of the software that we covered here, please leave a comment and let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.